The cold winter wind whipped through the main street of Silver Creek as Harriet Collins clutched her threadbare coat tighter around her slender frame, wondering if she had made the most catastrophic mistake of her 22 years of life. The year was 1875, and the promise of a teaching position in this remote Wyoming territory had seemed like salvation after her parents' deaths left her with nothing but debts and a Boston townhouse she could no longer afford. Silver Creek appeared nothing like the thriving frontier community described in the correspondence from the town council. A single muddy street lined with weathered buildings, most looking as though they might collapse in the next strong breeze, stretched before her. The stagecoach that had deposited her along with her 2 trunks containing everything she still owned in the world had already disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving her alone as curious faces peered from windows and doorways. "You must be the new schoolteacher," a gruff voice called from behind her. Harriet turned to see an elderly man with a silver beard approaching, his steps slow but purposeful. "Yes, sir. Harriet Collins, from Boston." "Walter Jenkins, town mayor." He extended a gnarled hand, which she shook politely. "Wasn't expecting you until next week." "The letter said October 15th, Harriet replied, producing the crumpled paper from her pocket. The mayor squinted at it. "So it does. My mistake. Well, the schoolhouse isn't quite ready, and neither is your living quarters." He scratched his head. "Might be a problem." Harriet felt her heart sink. I have nowhere else to go, Mr. Jenkins." Before the mayor could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. A tall figure on horseback approached, the late afternoon sun casting him in silhouette. As he drew closer, Harriet could make out broad shoulders beneath a worn leather duster, a strong jawline shadowed by several days' growth of beard, and eyes the color of a summer storm watching her with undisguised curiosity. "Mayor Jenkins," the rider greeted, tipping his hat. His voice was deep and resonant, carrying the hint of a southern drawl. "Everything all right?" "Mitchell Ross," the mayor said, relief evident in his tone. "This here's Miss Collins, our new schoolteacher. Seems there's been a mix-up with the dates, and her accommodations aren't ready." The cowboy Mitchell swung down from his horse with a grace that belied his size. Up close, Harriet could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps no more than 30. "Miss Collins," he said, tipping his hat to her. "Welcome to Silver Creek." "Thank you," she managed, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance after days of travel. "The school cabin roof still needs patching," Mitchell said to the mayor. "And the stove in the teacher's quarters is missing parts that won't arrive until next week's supply wagon." The mayor frowned. "That's a predicament." Mitchell studied Harriet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "My sister Hannah's got a spare room at the Ross Ranch. It's comfortable enough until the teacher's quarters are fixed up." "Oh, I couldn't possibly impose," Harriet began. "It's no imposition," Mitchell interrupted. "Hannah's been complaining about the lack of female company for months. She'll be delighted to have you." Before Harriet could formulate another protest, Mitchell had already begun loading her trunks onto his horse. "Unless you'd prefer to sleep in the saloon or the jail. Only other options in town with a roof that doesn't leak." The mayor chuckled. "Best take Mr. Ross up on his offer, Miss Collins. The Ross Ranch is the finest property in the county, and his sister is a respectable young woman." Harriet hesitated. Everything she knew about proper behavior warned against accepting such an offer from a stranger, especially a man. But she was thousands of miles from Boston, with night approaching and nowhere else to go. "Thank you, Mr. Ross. I accept your kind offer, temporarily of course." Mitchell nodded, then surprised her by extending his hand to help her mount his horse. Harriet stared at the outstretched hand, calloused and strong, suddenly aware that in her 22 years, no man had ever held her hand outside of formal dances under the watchful eyes of chaperones. Her parents had been loving but restrained, believers in proper Victorian decorum. Physical affection had been rare in the Collins household. "Miss Collins," Mitchell prompted, his expression patient. Taking a deep breath, Harriet placed her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed gently around hers, warm and steady, as he helped her into the saddle. That simple touch sent an unexpected wave of warmth through her, a sensation so foreign and yet so comforting that she nearly gasped. Mitchell gathered the reins and began leading the horse, her trunks balanced carefully behind the saddle. It's about 3 miles to the ranch, he said. Not too far, but it'll be dark soon. Hannah will have supper waiting. As they left the small town behind, Harriet found herself studying the back of her unexpected rescuer. His shoulders were broad beneath the duster, his stride easy and confident as he led the horse along the winding trail. The landscape around them was unlike anything she had ever seen, vast and wild, with rolling hills giving way to distant mountains whose peaks were already dusted with early snow. "It's beautiful," she said softly, almost to herself. Mitchell glanced back, the hint of a smile touching his lips. "Different from Boston, I imagine." "Very. I've never seen so much space. That's what draws most of us out here. Room to breathe, room to be." They continued in comfortable silence as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. Harriet found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of her situation, lulled by the gentle sway of the horse and the rhythm of Mitchell's steady footsteps. "Mr. Ross," she said eventually, "I truly appreciate your kindness. I confess I was quite at a loss when I arrived to find my accommodations weren't ready." "Call me Mitch," he replied without turning. "And it's nothing. Folks out here have to look after each other. The land doesn't forgive those who try to face it alone." "Is that why you came west? To not be alone?" He was quiet for so long that Harriet feared she had overstepped. But finally, he answered, "I came west because there was nothing left for me in Virginia after the war. My parents died. Our plantation was in ruins, and I couldn't stomach rebuilding on land worked by slaves, even if they were free by then." He paused. "Hannah was just 16. I needed to give her a fresh start. That was very noble of you." Mitchell's laugh held little humor. "Not noble. Necessary. You'll find most folks out here aren't running towards something so much as away from something else." "And what am I running from, Mr. Ross?" Harriet asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. This time when he looked back, his smile reached his eyes. "That, Miss Collins, remains to be seen." The sun had nearly set when they crested a hill, and Harriet caught her first glimpse of the Ross Ranch spread out in the valley below. A large cabin built of solid timber formed the centerpiece, with several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn arranged around it. Smoke curled invitingly from the stone chimney, and warm light glowed from the windows. "It's lovely," Harriet breathed. "It's home," Mitchell replied simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. As they approached, the front door of the cabin swung open, and a young woman with dark hair stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. "Mitch, you're late for supper, and I was just about to—" She stopped abruptly when she noticed Harriet. "Oh, hello there." "Hannah," Mitchell called. "This is Miss Harriet Collins, the new schoolteacher. She arrived early, and her quarters in town aren't ready. I told her she could stay with us for a few days." Hannah's face lit up with a wide smile as Mitchell helped Harriet dismount. Once again, his hand closed around hers, strong and secure, sending that same inexplicable warmth through her. "Miss Collins, what a wonderful surprise. We've been so looking forward to having a proper teacher in Silver Creek." "Please, call me Harriet," she replied, immediately drawn to the younger woman's open friendliness. "Then you must call me Hannah," she responded, taking Harriet's arm and leading her toward the house. "I hope you're hungry. I've made rabbit stew and fresh bread, and there's apple pie for dessert." Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting, far more comfortable than Harriet had expected to find on the frontier. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace, a solid wooden table with 6 chairs, and several comfortable-looking armchairs arranged nearby. Books filled a small shelf by the fireplace, a surprising luxury that immediately made Harriet feel more at home. "Your home is lovely," she said sincerely. Hannah beamed. "Mitch built most of it himself. He's been adding to it bit by bit over the past 5 years." "You're very talented, Mr. Ross," Harriet said, turning to find Mitchell watching her with an inscrutable expression. "Just practical," he replied. "A man needs solid walls between him and winter in Wyoming." Dinner was the most pleasant meal Harriet had experienced in months. Hannah chattered happily about the town, the ranch, and her excitement about having a teacher who could help her improve her reading and mathematics. Mitchell spoke less, but listened attentively, occasionally adding a comment or gentle correction to his sister's enthusiastic narration. "The school has 15 children enrolled," Hannah explained as she served the apple pie. ages 6 to 16, though most of the older boys only attend in winter when there's less ranch work. That's a wide range of ages to teach, Harriet said, unable to hide her nervousness. Her previous experience had been as an assistant in a Boston girls' academy, where students were carefully divided by age and ability. You'll manage, Mitchell said quietly. Those kids need someone who cares enough to try. After dinner, Hannah showed Harriet to a small but comfortable bedroom. It's not fancy, she apologized, but the mattress is stuffed with fresh straw, and the quilts are warm. It's perfect, Harriet assured her, touched by the younger woman's kindness. I can't thank you enough for your hospitality. Left alone, Harriet unpacked a few essentials from one of her trunks, changed into her nightgown, and sat on the edge of the bed. The events of the day washed over her in a wave of exhaustion. She thought of Mitchell Ross, his quiet strength, the unexpected gentleness of his calloused hand holding hers, the sadness that seemed to linger behind his storm-gray eyes. He was unlike any man she had ever known in Boston, where gentlemen were polished, educated, and often insufferably aware of their own importance. Sleep claimed her quickly, and she dreamed of vast, open spaces and a hand reaching for hers across an endless prairie. The next morning, Harriet woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Dressing quickly in one of her simpler dresses of blue cotton that had seen better days, but was still respectable, she made her way to the kitchen to find Mitchell alone at the stove. "Good morning," he said, glancing up from the skillet. "Hannah's gone to gather eggs." "Coffee, please," Harriet replied, surprised to see a man so comfortably taking on what she had always considered women's work. As if reading her thoughts, Mitchell's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Out here, everyone does what needs doing. No room for city ideas about who should cook or clean." "I wasn't judging," Harriet said quickly. "Just observing." He handed her a cup of strong black coffee. "After breakfast, I thought I'd take you to see the schoolhouse. Mayor Jenkins sent word that they've started repairs, but you should see what you're working with." "I'd appreciate that, thank you." Hannah returned with a basket of eggs, and breakfast was another pleasant, unhurried affair. Afterward, Mitchell saddled 2 horses, and Harriet faced another challenge. "I've never ridden astride," she admitted, eyeing the standard saddle with trepidation. Mitchell studied her for a moment. "I could rig a side saddle, but honestly, Miss Collins, you'll find life a lot easier out here if you learn to ride properly. Most places you'll need to go aren't accessible by wagon." Harriet squared her shoulders. "Then I suppose I'd better learn." Once again, Mitchell extended his hand to help her mount. This time, Harriet was more prepared for the contact, but the warm strength of his grip still sent a flutter through her stomach. With patient instruction, he showed her how to sit in the saddle, where to position her feet in the stirrups, and how to hold the reins. "The main thing is to relax," he advised. "Move with the horse, not against it." The ride to town was slow as Harriet adjusted to her new mode of transportation, but Mitchell never showed any sign of impatience. Instead, he pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area, his deep voice washing over her like a soothing balm. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with several men working on the roof. Inside, it was bare but sturdy, with rows of rough-hewn benches, a larger desk at the front, and a blackboard mounted on one wall. "It's not much," Mitchell said, watching her reaction carefully. Harriet walked the length of the room, running her fingers along the benches, already imagining them filled with children eager to learn. "It's a beginning," she replied. "A good beginning." Something in Mitchell's expression softened. "Mayor Jenkins said the books and supplies should arrive on next week's stage. In the meantime, I've got some books at the ranch you're welcome to use." "Those shelves by your fireplace? I noticed them last night." He nodded. "My father believed in education, even for a Virginia farmer's son. He sent me to college in Richmond for 2 years before the war broke out." Harriet's estimation of Mitchell Ross rose even higher. A college-educated rancher was not what she had expected to find in Wyoming territory. They spent the afternoon exploring Silver Creek, with Mitchell introducing her to the townspeople they encountered. The general store owner, the blacksmith, the barber who also served as the town's doctor all greeted her with genuine welcome, clearly pleased to have a teacher for their children. As the days passed, Harriet fell into a comfortable routine at the Ross Ranch. Mornings were spent helping Hannah with chores, then riding into town to oversee the preparations of the schoolhouse and her future living quarters. Mitchell was often busy with ranch work, but he made time each day to check on her progress, sometimes bringing her a simple lunch or offering to help move furniture. Each time their hands touched passing a tool, steadying her as she dismounted, helping her over a muddy patch of ground, Harriet felt that same unexpected warmth, a connection that seemed to grow stronger rather than diminishing with familiarity. She found herself looking forward to those brief moments of contact, then chiding herself for such improper thoughts. A week turned into 2, and still, her accommodations in town weren't ready. The parts for the stove had arrived, but then a leak was discovered in the roof, and new shingles had to be ordered. Harriet began to suspect that Mitchell and Hannah were in no hurry to see the repairs completed, and to her surprise, she found she wasn't either. One evening, as Hannah went to visit a friend in town, Harriet and Mitchell sat by the fire, a comfortable silence between them as she mended a tear in one of her dresses and he cleaned his rifle. "The mayor says the school can open next Monday, even if my quarters aren't ready," Harriet said, breaking the silence. "I've prepared lessons for the first week, though I'm still not entirely sure what to expect." Mitchell set aside his rifle. "You'll do fine. Those kids need someone like you." "Someone like me? What does that mean?" He seemed to consider his words carefully. "Someone who sees beyond Silver Creek. Someone who can show them there's a wider world out there, even if most of them will never leave Wyoming." "Is that what you want? To leave Wyoming someday?" The question slipped out before Harriet could consider its propriety. Mitchell's gaze fixed on the fire. "I used to dream of going back east, maybe finishing my education. But now—" He gestured vaguely, encompassing the ranch, the land. "This is home. Hannah loves it here. We've built something good." "You've built something wonderful," Harriet corrected softly. His eyes met hers, and for a breathless moment, something unspoken passed between them. Then Mitchell cleared his throat and stood. "Getting late. I should check on the horses before turning in." Harriet watched him go, her heart beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. What was happening to her? She had come west to teach, to build a new life for herself, not to develop feelings for a rancher, no matter how kind or educated he might be. The following Sunday, Harriet dressed in her best gown, a deep green wool with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs for the church service in town. The entire community gathered in the small, whitewashed building, with Reverend Thomas leading them in prayer and song before delivering a sermon on perseverance in the face of hardship. Sitting between Mitchell and Hannah in the crowded pew, Harriet was acutely aware of Mitchell's solid presence beside her. When the congregation rose to sing the final hymn, their shoulders brushed, and Mitchell's hand accidentally covered hers on the hymnal they shared. Neither moved away, and they finished the hymn with their hands touching, a connection that felt both innocent and profoundly intimate. After the service, as the congregation spilled into the churchyard for socializing, Mayor Jenkins approached with good news. "Miss Collins, your quarters will be ready by Tuesday at the latest, just in time for your second day of teaching." "That's wonderful," Harriet replied, ignoring the unexpected pang of disappointment she felt. "Thank you for all your hard work." "Don't thank me," the mayor chuckled. "It's Mitchell here who's been riding into town every other day to check on the progress and lend a hand." Harriet turned to Mitchell in surprise. "You never mentioned that." He shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the attention. "Wasn't worth mentioning. Just wanted to make sure things were done right." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a striking woman in an expensive-looking blue dress. "Mitchell Ross," she said, her voice carrying a southern lilt similar to his own. "You've been avoiding me." Mitchell's expression closed off. "Margaret, I wasn't aware you were looking for me." "Clearly." The woman Margaret replied with a pointed look at Harriet. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" Mitchell's jaw tightened fractionally. "Margaret Beaumont. This is Harriet Collins, our new schoolteacher. Miss Collins, Mrs. Beaumont owns the Silver Stream Ranch neighboring ours." "Widow Beaumont," Margaret corrected with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "These past 2 years. A pleasure to meet you, Miss Collins. I'm sure you'll find Silver Creek quaint after Boston." "It's been very welcoming," Harriet replied, immediately disliking the other woman's condescending tone. "Mitchell has always been especially welcoming to newcomers," Margaret said, placing a familiar hand on Mitchell's arm. "We all appreciate his hospitality." The implication was clear, and Harriet felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and a surprising flare of jealousy. Mitchell gently but firmly removed Margaret's hand from his arm. "If you'll excuse us, Mrs. Beaumont," he said coolly. "We need to get back to the ranch. Miss Collins has preparations for tomorrow's school opening." Without waiting for a response, Mitchell guided Harriet away with a light touch at the small of her back. They collected Hannah, who had been chatting with friends, and made their way to where their horses were tied. "I apologize for Margaret," Mitchell said as they rode home, his voice tight. "She can be forward," Hannah supplied with a snort. "She's been trying to get her hooks in a Mitch since her husband died. The Beaumont Ranch is heavily mortgaged, and she needs a man to run it." "Hannah," Mitchell warned. "It's true," Hannah insisted. "Everyone knows it." Harriet remained quiet, unsure how to process this new information or the unexpected jealousy she had felt. It was none of her business if Mitchell had a relationship with the widow Beaumont. After all, in 2 days, she would be moving into town, and their daily interactions would necessarily decrease. The thought left her feeling strangely hollow. Monday morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect day for the opening of school. 15 children ranging from tiny 6-year-old twins to a gangly 16-year-old boy filed into the schoolhouse, their faces a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Parents crowded around the doorway, equally curious about the new teacher from the east. Harriet had dressed with care in a simple navy dress with a white collar, her hair neatly pinned up. As she called the class to order, she caught sight of Mitchell standing at the back of the room, his tall frame leaning against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her an encouraging nod. Drawing strength from his presence, Harriet turned to her students with a warm smile. "Good morning. I'm Miss Collins, and I'm very pleased to be your teacher. We're going to learn many exciting things together this year." The day passed in a blur of introductions, assessments of reading and mathematics levels, and establishing classroom rules. By the time the children filed out at 3 o'clock, Harriet was exhausted but exhilarated. She had connected with these frontier children more easily than she had expected, finding them curious and eager despite their varying levels of previous education. As the last student departed, Mitchell approached her desk. "Congratulations on your first day, Miss Collins." "Thank you," she replied, gathering her books. "It went better than I expected." "The children already adore you," he said, helping her with her coat. "Even Billy Thompson, and he's run off 3 previous teachers." Harriet laughed. "He just needs challenges to keep him engaged. He's quite bright." "Like I said," Mitchell responded quietly, "you see beyond what's obvious." They walked to where their horses were tied, and Mitchell handed her the reins to her mount, a gentle mare named Daisy that he had been teaching her to ride over the past 2 weeks. "Tomorrow, you'll be staying in town," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Mayor Jenkins says the quarters are ready." "Yes," Harriet replied, surprised by how reluctant she felt. "I should thank you and Hannah properly for your hospitality. You've both been so kind. It was no hardship having you with us." Mitchell helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Hannah will miss your company." "And you, Mr. Ross?" The question slipped out before she could think better of it. "Will you miss my company as well?" His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and when he looked up at her, the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "Yes, Miss Collins. I believe I will." That evening, Hannah insisted on preparing a special dinner to celebrate Harriet's successful first day of teaching and to mark her last night at the ranch. The meal was festive, with Hannah chattering about how much she would miss having another woman in the house and extracting promises from Harriet to visit regularly. Mitchell was quieter than usual, though his eyes often strayed to Harriet when he thought she wasn't looking. After dinner, as Hannah cleared the dishes, he excused himself to check on a pregnant mare in the barn. "He's sad you're leaving," Hannah said once her brother was out of earshot. "I've never seen him take to anyone the way he has to you." "Hannah, that's not. We're just friends," Harriet protested weakly. The younger woman gave her a knowing look. "If you say so, but I've seen the way you look at each other when you think no one's watching." Harriet felt her cheeks flush. Even if there were feelings, it wouldn't be proper. "I'm going to be living alone in town, teaching the community's children. I have to maintain a certain reputation." "This isn't Boston," Hannah pointed out. "Out here, people care more about character than rigid rules of propriety." And everyone knows Mitch has the best character of any man for 100 miles. Later, unable to sleep, Harriet slipped outside for some fresh air. The night was clear, a canopy of stars stretching endlessly above the ranch. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and wandered toward the corral, where she could see a lantern still burning in the barn. She found Mitchell sitting on a bale of hay, a small leather-bound book open in his hands. He looked up at her approach, surprise and something warmer flashing across his features. "Can't sleep?" he asked, closing the book. "Too many thoughts," she admitted, gesturing to the volume in his hands. "What are you reading?" "Emerson. Nature. It helps me make sense of things sometimes." Harriet smiled, delighted. "I wouldn't have taken you for a transcendentalist, Mr. Ross. There's a lot you don't know about me yet, Miss Collins." The way he said, yet sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. She sat beside him on the hay bale, closer than propriety would dictate, but somehow it felt right. "Tell me something then." "Something I don't know." Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, then said, "I write poetry. Terrible poetry, probably, but I've filled 3 journals since coming west. Will you show me sometime?" "Maybe." He turned to face her, their shoulders almost touching. "Now you. Tell me something I don't know about Harriet Collins." She thought for a moment. "I came west because there was nothing left for me in Boston, but also because I've always secretly wanted adventure. My parents would have been scandalized they raised me to be a proper Boston lady, destined for a suitable marriage and a life of social obligations." "And is that what you wanted? A suitable marriage?" "I thought so, once," Harriet admitted. "There was a man, a colleague of my father's at the university. He was kind, educated, everything my parents hoped for me. But when my father died and our financial situation became clear, his interest quickly faded." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Then he was a fool. Perhaps. Or just practical." She sighed. "In any case, it was for the best. I've discovered I'm not very good at being a proper Boston lady. I like riding astride and feeling the sun on my face and teaching children who genuinely want to learn." "Wyoming suits you," Mitchell said softly. "You've come alive here." "Yes," she whispered. "I think perhaps I have." They sat in companionable silence, the only sounds the occasional shuffle of horses in their stalls and the distant call of a night bird. Without planning to, Harriet found herself leaning slightly against Mitchell's solid shoulder, drawn to his warmth in the cool night. "Harriet," he said, her given name sounding new and precious in his deep voice. "I'm not good with words, despite my poetry attempts." "You seem to do just fine," she murmured. Mitchell took a deep breath. "These past weeks, having you at the ranch, getting to know you. It's been the happiest I can remember being since before the war." Harriet's heart began to race. "Mitchell, I know you're leaving tomorrow, and I respect that. You need to establish yourself as the teacher, independent and respected." He turned to face her fully. "But I'd like your permission to call on you properly. In town, with everyone knowing my intentions." "And what are your intentions, Mr. Ross?" Harriet asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In answer, Mitchell slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, reached for her hand. His fingers twined with hers, calloused skin against soft, in a connection that felt more intimate than any embrace. "My intention," he said, his gray eyes holding hers, "is to court you, Miss Collins. To see if what I'm feeling, what I think you might be feeling too, could grow into something permanent." Harriet looked down at their joined hands, overwhelmed by the emotions flooding through her. This man, this cowboy, had been the first to hold her hand outside of formal social conventions. The first to make her feel this strange, wonderful warmth that spread from her fingers throughout her entire body. "Yes," she whispered, raising her eyes to his. "I would like that very much." Mitchell's smile transformed his face, erasing years of worry and sadness. Slowly, respectfully, he raised their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then I'll call on you Wednesday evening. Perhaps you'll allow me to escort you to dinner at the hotel restaurant." "I'll look forward to it," Harriet replied, feeling as though her heart might burst with happiness. The next morning brought both the excitement of her second day of teaching and the sadness of leaving the Ross Ranch. Hannah hugged her tightly before she left, extracting a promise that Harriet would join them for Sunday dinner whenever possible. Mitchell loaded her trunks onto a wagon and drove her into town himself, helping her settle into the small, but comfortable rooms attached to the schoolhouse. "It's nice," he said, looking around the simply furnished space. "Needs a woman's touch, but it's solid. It will be perfect once I unpack my books and personal things," Harriet assured him. "And it's only a short walk to the school." Mitchell lingered by the door, clearly reluctant to leave. "If you need anything, send word. I'll be in town tomorrow for supplies. And of course, I'll see you Wednesday evening." "I'll be waiting," Harriet said, surprised by her own boldness. After he left, she leaned against the closed door, hugging herself with unexpected joy. She had come west seeking independence, a chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. She had never expected to find someone like Mitchell Ross, a man who respected her independence even as he offered her his heart. The following weeks established a new rhythm to Harriet's life. Days were filled with teaching, evenings with preparation and grading, but Wednesday evenings and Sundays belonged to Mitchell. True to his word, he courted her properly, taking her to dinner at the hotel, escorting her to church, bringing her wildflowers and books he thought she might enjoy. They rode together on Saturday afternoons, exploring the beautiful countryside around Silver Creek. With each meeting, each conversation, each brief touch of hands, Harriet fell deeper under his spell. Mitchell was unlike any man she had known, thoughtful and intelligent beneath his rugged exterior, respectful of her work and opinions, and possessed of a quiet strength that made her feel simultaneously protected and empowered. The townspeople watched their courtship with approval and, in some cases, open delight. Only Margaret Beaumont observed with narrowed eyes and tight smiles, occasionally making remarks just pointed enough to sting without being openly rude. "You must find frontier life so challenging after Boston," she commented one Sunday after church. "And Mitchell's ranch, while adequate, must seem quite rustic compared to what you're used to." "Actually, Mrs. Beaumont," Harriet replied with perfect politeness, "I find the authenticity of the Ross Ranch far more appealing than pretension. Mitchell has built something honest and true, which is more valuable than superficial refinements." Margaret's eyes had flashed with anger, but before she could respond, Mitchell appeared at Harriet's side, his hand finding hers with natural ease. "Ready to go, Harriet? Hannah's expecting us for dinner." As winter settled over Wyoming, bringing snow and bitter cold, Mitchell's visits became even more precious. Often, he would brave treacherous conditions to reach town, arriving with snow dusting his coat and hat, his hands red with cold until Harriet warmed them between her own. One such evening in early December, they sat before the fire in her small quarters, a pot of tea between them as the wind howled outside. "You shouldn't have come tonight," Harriet scolded gently. "The weather is only getting worse." "A little snow won't keep me away," Mitchell replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "Besides, I have something important to ask you." Harriet's heart skipped a beat. "Oh." Mitchell reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, hand-carved with delicate patterns of leaves and flowers. "I made this," he said, presenting it to her. "Open it." Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. Harriet's breath caught in her throat. "It was my mother's," Mitchell explained, his voice husky with emotion. "One of the few things I brought west. I've been waiting for the right woman to give it to." He took her hands in his. "Harriet Collins, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and laughter back into my world, and I can't imagine a future without you in it. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Harriet's eyes as joy washed over her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Mitchell Ross, I will marry you." Mitchell slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her hands in his, those same strong, gentle hands that had first touched hers months ago, awakening feelings she hadn't known she was capable of experiencing. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I love you, Harriet," he murmured against her lips. "I think I've loved you since the moment you stood on that dusty street, looking lost but determined." "And I love you," she replied, marveling at how natural the words felt, how right. "You were the first man to hold my hand. Did you know that? Outside of formal dances, I mean." Mitchell smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm honored to be the first." and I plan to be the last as well. They were married on Christmas Day in the Silver Creek Church, with Hannah as maid of honor and the entire town in attendance. Harriet wore a dress of ivory satin that Hannah had helped her sew, with lace from her mother's wedding gown at the collar and cuffs. Mitchell, nearly unrecognizable in a new suit, watched her walk down the aisle with such love in his eyes that she could barely speak her vows through her tears of joy. After a brief honeymoon at a hotel in Cheyenne, they returned to the Ross Ranch, where Mitchell had expanded the master bedroom and added built-in bookshelves for Harriet's collection. Hannah, delighted to have a sister at last, had prepared the house beautifully, with fresh curtains and a new quilt for their bed. Harriet continued teaching, riding to town each morning and home each afternoon, though heavy snows occasionally forced her to stay overnight in her old quarters. On those nights, Mitchell would often appear, having braved the weather to bring her supplies or simply to assure himself of her safety. Spring brought new beginnings. The school flourished under Harriet's guidance, with even the most reluctant students showing remarkable progress. The ranch prospered as well, with a successful calving season and new contracts for their beef with merchants in Cheyenne. It was on a perfect May evening, with wildflowers carpeting the hills and the air filled with their sweet scent, that Harriet shared her news with Mitchell. They had ridden to a favorite spot overlooking a small lake, where they spread a blanket and unpacked the picnic supper Hannah had prepared. "I have something to tell you," Harriet said, her eyes shining with secret joy. Mitchell paused with a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect," she assured him, taking his hand, that same strong, gentle hand that had first awakened her heart, and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The wonder that spread across Mitchell's face was something Harriet knew she would remember until her dying day. He gathered her in his arms with a whoop of joy that startled birds from nearby trees, then immediately apologized for being too rough. "I'm not made of glass," she laughed, drawing his hand back to her middle. "Your child is in there, safe and sound." "Our child," he corrected, his voice filled with awe. "A little piece of both of us." They lay together on the blanket as the sun began its descent, Mitchell's hand protectively covering her stomach, his other arm cradling her against his side. Above them, the vast Wyoming sky stretched endlessly, painted in hues of gold and crimson that gradually gave way to the first stars of evening. "Are you happy, Harriet?" Mitchell asked quietly. "With this life we're building?" She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible. You've given me everything, Mitchell. A home, a family, a love I never thought I'd find." "You've given me the same," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "A second chance at happiness, hope for the future." As darkness settled around them, Harriet nestled closer to her husband, secure in his embrace and in the knowledge that this cowboy, this extraordinary man who had been the first to hold her hand, had also been the first to teach her what love truly felt like. And now, with their child growing beneath her heart, he would continue to teach her new dimensions of love each day for the rest of their lives. In the years that followed, the Ross family flourished. Harriet gave birth to a healthy son they named James, after Mitchell's father, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Eleanor, named for Harriet's mother. Hannah eventually married the new doctor who settled in Silver Creek, building a home of her own nearby. Harriet continued teaching until the school grew large enough to require multiple teachers, at which point she became the school's administrator, guiding education in Silver Creek with wisdom and compassion. Mitchell expanded the ranch operations, experimenting with new breeding techniques and modern farming methods he learned from agricultural journals Harriet ordered from back east. Their home grew as well, with Mitchell adding rooms as their family expanded and their prosperity increased. But no matter how large the house became or how many improvements were made, Mitchell and Harriet's favorite place remained the porch swing he had built during her first pregnancy. There, in the quiet evenings after the children were asleep, they would sit hand in hand, watching the stars emerge over the Wyoming hills, their fingers intertwined in that simple gesture that had first connected them. And on their 30th anniversary, as their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate, Mitchell presented Harriet with a leather-bound volume, his collected poems, written over their years together, each one a testament to the love that had begun with a cowboy offering his hand to a lost schoolteacher on a dusty frontier street. The first and only copies, he told her with the same smile that still made her heart race. For the woman who taught me that home isn't a place, but a person. And to think, Harriet replied, her eyes shining with tears of joy. It all began with you holding my hand. The best decision I ever made, Mitchell said, taking her hand once more, his touch as warm and reassuring as it had been on that first day. And one I plan to continue for at least 30 more years. I'll hold you to that promise, Mr. Ross, Harriet whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder as the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in the same brilliant colors that had welcomed her to this land decades earlier, a land where she had found not just a home, but her heart's true destiny in the hands of a cowboy who had shown her what love really meant.